Right. I know folks are still grabbing some coffee and getting back to their seats. I'll just start with some opening introductory thoughts, and then we'll go ahead and get into the good stuff. So thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you so much to my panelists, who I'm very excited to introduce. My name is Rowan Price. I'm the Senior Policy Advisor for Nuclear Energy on Third Way's Climate and Energy Program. I've had the pleasure of getting to work on nuclear fuel supply issues over my time at Third Way at a very exciting time to be in this space, so there is plenty for us to talk about today. And I think that the first panel did a great job of queuing up what we're going to talk about. Lots of shout outs for different steps of the fuel supply and highlighting the importance of that, because as we know, all of these ambitious timelines for deployment only mean so much if you can't fuel your reactors. So if we're going to deliver on the energy promise of this nuclear resurgence, we need a reliable, durable nuclear fuel supply. And that's not going to come just from the US's efforts. We've seen a lot of change in the nuclear fuel supply space in the US. We started from behind. We have passed key legislation to authorize and fund programs to strengthen our US nuclear fuel supply chain while also reducing our dependence on unreliable adversarial suppliers to ensure our energy security moving forward. And as we are doing that, our allies and partners are also working to expand their capabilities. And so as the urgency grows to meet ambitious timelines and also meet a rapidly increasing energy demand, the need for intentionally leveraging our existing capabilities to build out the fuel supply is more important than ever, because that way we will have fuel supply build out that is both speedy and smart. And that is really what's important. So today's excellent panelists are here to talk a little bit more about their perspectives on global nuclear fuel supply chains and how collaboration can really pave the way for secure fuel supply moving forward. And I'll very briefly introduce them one by one. We'll do the same thing the first panel did. I'll ask you to give your remarks and then introduce the next panelist. And then we will take it from there. I'll just briefly note, unfortunately, our fourth panelist was unable to join us, but we do still have an excellent roster here to give their thoughts. So I will simply go down the line. So first, Dr. Mansong Im is the director for the Center for Nuclear Security Science and Policy Initiatives and professor in the Department of Nuclear Engineering at Texas A&M University. Formerly, he served on the nuclear engineering faculty at Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology, NC State University, and MIT. He was also joint faculty between Oak Ridge National Lab and NCSU, a Sam Nunn International Security Fellow at Georgia Tech, a member of North Carolina Science Advisory Board on Air Toxic Emissions, and a member of Idaho National Laboratory's Nuclear Nonproliferation External Steering Committee. So I will first ask Dr. Im to share his thoughts on the state of nuclear fuel supply and where we go from here.
Thank you, moderator. I'm from Texas now, so 2 weeks ago we had a Texas Nuclear Summit in Austin. About 700 people gathered, including companies, vendors, academicians, and insurance companies, financial sector, and more importantly, lawyers. So this means there is something serious going on. Texas is geared toward really revitalizing nuclear renaissance, hopefully that is true. Leading the country, for example, former Governor Rick Perry, he's establishing Fermi America to support data centers and West Texas economic development. Is working with Doosan Heavy Industry, Samsung, Hyundai Construction, and so on. So he is doing it, and then the Texas government came up with House Bill 14450. They're spending $350 million for the next 2 years. They have to spend all that money. This is a seed money. They want to increase their support if we see the success out of this initial investment. So this is real. I was talking to Dan Poneman, the acting Secretary of Energy last night. So we talking about all this, and what he said was, stop talking, stop building. So hopefully what we discussed today help with that. As our moderator said, all this development cannot happen or succeed without fuel. So we have to make sure that there is fuel to fuel this development. But then where does that fuel come from? The United States currently doesn't have the capacity. Only 5% of our uranium comes from domestic operations. We used to rely heavily on Russia, on our enrichment. We're talking about SMRs and HALEU. Well, we are hoping to develop the capability. We don't have it. So I think we are in a hurry to really develop this domestic capability, but as already noted in the previous panel, simply we don't have that, I think, luxury of working only with domestic partners in making this happen. So we need multiple partners, multiple customers, multiple suppliers. So I think that is, of course, imperative. When we talk about fuel supply chain, I think we have to think about potential challenges. There will be fluctuations in the market. There will be potentially geopolitical retaliation from the excluded supporters. There will be, I think, unknown delays due to regulatory licensing challenges. There will be even changes in the technology and so on. So there are many potential challenges, and who knows, last time when we talked about Renaissance, fracking happened, Fukushima happened, and that went away. And also, I think, although we talking about all this great new development, even including the Texas development, we were also saying there, if anything wrong happens, any instant happening in the reactors or in the fuel cycle, this could all be dead. In the eyes of the public, nuclear is nuclear, you know. So we have to be really mindful about protecting materials, securing the access. So all those things have to be in place to really effectively address the potential challenges. But I think that means we do need international cooperation to have resilience, to have diversity, to have commercial viability, and to have the really long-term viability, to capacity to really support this. And also our neighbors, many countries who wants to develop their nuclear capability need support. Obviously, nuclear technology is something you cannot do with your own capability or your own capacity. Inherently, this technology requires international cooperation, especially as a newcomer country. So question is then, how do we develop that multilateral or international cooperation? I think Sapporo 5, I think our moderator will ask that question in the next round. I think he started that. I think we should be mindful about the membership, what are the requirements, and what is expected, performance, and so on. But I think given the fact that we're talking about special technology, special materials, the membership should be maybe tied to what we know, IAEA safeguard, more importantly, maybe additional protocol, so that we have a complete transparency in the basically the spread of this technology and materials. I think we should think about the fluctuations in the market. So we have to have mechanisms supporting commercial viability. In other words, long-term guarantee, co-investment, guaranteed offtake contract, tax credits. All those things should be part of the standard contract among the multilateral agreement to ensure the success of all the partners. Supply chain must be also tied to, I think, some sort of a requirement. I think at the beginning, maybe there may be some loan guarantee, but then there has to be accountability set up in this as well. So if there is loan guarantee, there should be some sunset clause in terms of performance requirement, what are the really minimum successful criteria that we can say this worked. That becomes very important for credibility of this development for the industrial partners, especially newcomer countries. I think US government leadership could be leveraged to encourage investment in the foreign countries to really strengthen the base of this cooperation and et cetera. I think I'll have to stop and continue a little bit later.
Very
Thank you
good.
so much.
Thank you so much for your initial remarks. I think you've queued up a lot of potential discussion points here. I think you make good points about, the importance of responsibly building out fuel supply in a way that, includes a measure of accountability and also, is pursued in a way that is thoughtful and, not redundant, but is working to highlight all of our partners' strengths in particular ways. So next, I will introduce Jenny Dunn, who is a senior manager for government affairs for Urenco USA. Before joining Urenco, she spearheaded energy policy engagement, including collaboration on nuclear fuel supply with the US federal government on behalf of the UK Embassy in Washington, D.C. And prior to moving to the US, Jenny worked in the UK's oil and gas sector. So Jenny, I would love to hear your thoughts.
Well, thanks so much, Rowan, and thank you so much to Third Way and the Center for National Interest for inviting me here to speak at this, I think, very timely event, and in my opinion, the most important panel, which is on fuel supply and how we make sure we have a reliable fuel supply as we look to deploy more nuclear. Looking at the title of the event, so how do we unleash American nuclear energy, but also what is the role for allies within that objective, I can see why Third Way and the Center for the National Interest wanted a company like Urenco to be on the fuel supply panel, because the Urenco Group is a global provider of commercial enrichment services. We operate the only commercial scale enrichment facility in the United States, but we also have enrichment facilities in 3 of the US's closest global allied nations, that being the UK, the Netherlands, and Germany. So a bit first about Urenco USA, who I work for. Urenco USA is an American company. As I said, we operate the only commercial scale enrichment facility. It's called the National Enrichment Facility. It is in the southeastern corner of the state of New Mexico, right on the border of Texas. It began operating in 2010, and to date, the facility represents an over $5 billion investment in US manufacturing. This facility, our facility in New Mexico, was built entirely on commercial contracts with our utility customers. So we received no government funding to build that facility. And we currently have the capacity to meet about 1/3 of US enrichment needs. We have an all-American workforce. Despite my terrible UK accent, I am indeed an American citizen. So we employ about 500 full-time employees and long-term contractors at the site. We engage hundreds of US domestic suppliers, and we are regulated by the NRC. But Urenco USA benefits undoubtedly from the experience, size, and partnerships of our sister sites in the UK, the Netherlands, and Germany. And Urenco USA also benefits from Urenco's 50 years of enrichment plant operations and the technology development over that time. So we're a gas centrifuge enrichment technology. So firstly, I did want to speak a bit about what are the practical benefits of having a globally connected nuclear fuel supply chain amongst allies, and in particular, what's the benefit of having companies with global operations within the nuclear fuel supply chain. So as I said, we have the benefit of having 4 enrichment facilities globally, 3 in Europe and the only one in commercial scale one in North America. This gives us expertise, security of supply, and the ability to manage market and geopolitical risks. Practically, this has meant that we have been able to respond to a major market shift, which was Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and countries wanting to move away from Russian fuel supply due to energy independence and national security concerns. We've gone from reducing capacity, so prior to the invasion, we were going to reduce capacity in line with market demand, to now maintaining capacity and increasing capacity. And so globally, Urenco has now committed to a 2.5 million separative work units. or SWU. That is the measurement that we use for enrichment. So 2.5 million SWU globally of new enrichment capacity, and that will come from our US, Dutch, and German sites. At the site in New Mexico, we're currently in the middle of an expansion project that's going to increase our operations by 700,000 SWU by 2027. The first 2 new cascades are coming online, and the third will come online very, very shortly. And similarly, at our Dutch facility, we've committed to 1.5 million SWU additional capacity, which will be completed in the early 2030s. In terms of the advanced fuel market, Urenco is closely monitoring that market. We have under construction in the UK a high-assay low-enriched uranium facility, or HALEU facility. That will come online in 2031, and we view it really as a facility that will provide HALEU to the global allied market and be a good source of commercial supply of HALEU outside of Russia. We expect this plant to produce approximately 27 tons of HALEU annually. We've got room to double that capacity if the market requires it. And also we continue to closely evaluate developing a similar facility in the US, again, should the market demand, and our efforts in the UK will allow us to quickly copy the design of the UK facility and implement the facility in the US. Just a bit more on advanced fuels. Our facility in New Mexico recently received NRC authorization to produce uranium enriched to 10% U-235. That's what we like to call LEU+. So in addition to LEU+ serving the current US reactor fleet, many advanced reactor companies can use 10% enriched uranium to demonstrate their technology and in operations as well. And LEU+ can also be used as feedstock for a HALEU facility as well. So we'll begin producing LEU+ in New Mexico in 2026, and we'll be delivering LEU+ to US customers for fuel loading in 2027. So lots of exciting stuff happening at our facility in the US and globally. So as a company, we work with our global customers to gain contract commitments to underpin the financing needed to invest in expansion. But we do see a key role for allied governments in providing certainty to the market so that we have confidence that when we make these huge investments in enrichment, that they're going to be protected, right? They're not going to become stranded assets. And we especially see a role for allied governments in the advanced fuel market, which is in its infancy still. And it's still not entirely clear how big that market is going to be. It's already been mentioned, but we as a company support the intention of the Sapporo 5 to establish secure and resilient fuel supply chains, irrespective of Russia. And we think that initiatives that seek to grow allied partnership in the fuel supply chain should be strengthened and continue, particularly as global allies look to deploy new nuclear. But we're also seeing the impacts of the Sapporo 5 in the market today. We see the benefit, particularly in Europe, and we have signed sort of several new customers as they look to move away from Russian supply. Finally, I would like to highlight that international partnerships in other sectors can really spur more collaboration in the nuclear sector too, and in fuel supply chain. It's already been mentioned, but the knock-on effects of international collaboration in tech and AI, and the global partnerships we have seen in recent months, including between the US and the UK with the US with Japan, and the US with Korea. There's a clear nexus between those tech partnership agreements and further collaboration in energy and nuclear in particular. And I don't need to tell this audience this, but nuclear is just so well positioned to meet the sort of enormous energy needs of those important sectors in the economy. So I think it's really important that as an industry, we remain really prominent and active and vocal in broader international partnership conversations on sectors of the economy that are going to be strategically important going forward. It's important that we use those international partnerships to spur new investment in an allied fuel supply chain. I think enrichment gets a lot of airtime, and it is very important. And Urenco, I love working for Urenco, but it will actually take investment in all of the fuel supply chain to build a secure and allied supply. So that includes conversion. I think probably Jarrett will talk a bit about that, but that could be a real pinch point in the global market in the coming years. Enrichment too, with advanced fuel, we've got the extra step of deconversion, which we need to figure out, and then new types of fabrication for the advanced reactors as well. So there is to achieve that globally resilient fuel supply chain amongst ally, we've got to think of the full fuel supply chain and use these sort of international opportunities in strategic sectors to really come together to coordinate where we can and also to drive competition and innovation too.
Great. Thank you so much, Jenny. I want to pull on one thing that you said that I think connects to our broader theme here particularly well is what you noted about Urenco's plans to first reduce its capacity prior to the Russian invasion and then a total change of plan following that. And I think that really speaks to how fuel supply as an issue is not just an energy proposition, and therefore cooperation on it is not just energy cooperation, but it is truly a national security imperative when you're talking about the real repercussions of having that capacity. And maybe we'll have time to get more into that later. So thank you very much. So on to our final panelist. And as the first panel said, last but certainly not least, Jarrett Blanc has worn many hats in the US government and in the NGO world, too many for me to share here. But currently he is a strategic advisor to Cameco. And previously he served as energy and national security advisor to the Secretary of Energy. So I will ask you to share your remarks.
Thank you very much. And let me extend also my thanks to the hosts and the participants for what has already been a terrific discussion. It's been my experience that these panels are most interesting when there's some amount of dispute. And so I'm going to apologize in advance that there isn't any. In fact, I could probably just bring a picture of Miriam and sit it on my chair with a little recording of what she said about the need for an integrated North American sort of continental fuel cycle and leave it at that. But that would also be rude to the conveners, and so I'll say a few words to extend what I think has already been the excellent analysis already provided. I want to make sort of four broad points about the need for international cooperation in the fuel cycle. The first is that in the short to mid-term, it is simply categorically necessary for the United States. We have two major drivers for anticipated increased fuel demand in the United States. The first is the Russia ban, and the second is all this expansion of nuclear capacity that we are anticipating, right? The build-out of AP1000s, the build-out of SMRs. There is an expectation, I think a correct one, that we need to be prepared for a much higher level of fuel demand in the midterm. And the reality is that the United States needs to integrate with its partners and allies in order to meet both of those sets of demands. Cameco is the world's second largest uranium miner. It's the world's largest publicly traded uranium miner. But maybe not as widely known in this group, it is also historically the United States is the largest uranium miner. And if you look at the resources that we currently have in the United States, we are certainly also the largest possessor of deployed uranium resources in the United States today. So we have a very clear picture of what the United States needs and what we can meet from the United States and where we need to sort of pull in a broader community of friends. So even as we are looking to hopefully restart our mining operations in the United States, the simple truth is that we are going to continue to need allied, especially Canadian uranium, in order to meet both those short and midterm projected demands. If we don't have that, we're not going to be able to meet it, and we're not going to be able to deal with the real geopolitical threat and the real energy threat that sort of is driving those two increased demand expectations. The same is true on conversion, where such a large percentage of US conversion is met at Port Hope in Canada. So why do we need an allied approach to the fuel cycle? Well, because otherwise we're probably not going to sufficiently meet the demands of the fuel cycle. That's number one. The other thing I would say is that if we look back across the last few years, we can see the need for integration in real time and in real life. So Ukraine, dependent on Russian fuel supply, not only enriched uranium, but uranium fuel, right? This is, in the United States, we buy a lot of enriched uranium from Russia, but not uranium fuel. In Europe, including in Ukraine, there's a lower absolute demand, but it's a more complicated one because they're actually buying finished fuel for Rosatom reactors. Westinghouse, a company that we also have 49% of, stepped up very quickly and was able to design and qualify fuel for Ukraine and now available for sale across Europe in order to meet that demand for fuel to replace the Russian supply chain. And again, if you think about this not just in terms of fuel, but in terms of enrichment and conversion and mining, you can see the alliance at work, right? You can see this partnership at work, meeting very quickly the geopolitical demand created by the further invasion of Ukraine. So that's number one. Why are we talking about an allied fuel supply chain? Because we absolutely have to be talking about it. The second thing I would say is that, and it was sort of alluded to already, this is a complicated market. These are long-term, very large investments. And we all know the history of some of these investments. There's overcapacity and undercapacity. One of the critical ways to address that problem is to have depth in the market, depth both on the supply side and the demand side. And so the effort currently underway to make sure that there is allied depth in the market in order to smooth a little bit some of the problems that we've seen in the past, I think is absolutely essential. And you see that as well, by the way, in foreign direct investment in the United States, right? You see it in the Urenco deployment in New Mexico. By the way, if anybody, I'm gonna put you on the spot here. You should all come and ask her for a tour. It's an amazing facility.
It is a big and beautiful plant.
You see it in Cameco's investment in Westinghouse. You see it in Cameco's investment in GLE. These are all, and what we are now looking forward to seeing are, on the president's trip to Japan, the Japanese announced the potential for $100 billion investment in AP1000s, another $100 billion investment in SMRs. These are critical FDI opportunities in the United States that should drive the build-out that we've been talking about here and should then also drive the fuel demand. And by the way, some of those investments should absolutely be in the fuel cycle in the United States, integrated abroad, in order to make sure that we're meeting those demands as we go forward. That's the second point. The third point, I don't want to dwell too much on this, but as I was introduced as having worn many hats in the US government, some of those hats have been non-proliferation rather than civil nuclear energy related. And as most people in this room probably know, the core insight of US non-proliferation policy for generations has been focus on fuel supply, don't focus on weaponization, right? Because it's much easier to perceive, it's much easier to control. And so again, if we're thinking about this massive potential build out of nuclear energy capacity, per the Dubai commitments, tripling by 2050, all of these things, the need for additional fuel in order to meet that reactor demand, to do that while at the same time continuing to achieve our non-proliferation gains, simply requires that we be deeply engaged with our allies and partners in order to make sure that we are providing for these requirements in a way that is safe and secure. And it goes, I think, again, to your point that we're in a fantastic moment right now of very, very broad, both in the United States and internationally, support for civil nuclear energy. One critical component for maintaining that support is maintaining that safety and security legacy that we have all worked so hard on. So that's the third point, driving the need for this conversation. And then the fourth point that I want to make is that there's also there's a huge opportunity in the US and its web of partners and alliances for developing in a cooperative way cool new technologies. And so I want to, this is not just sort of an advertisement, but I want to mention, because it's a case study that I know well, global laser enrichment. So this is Cameco's investment in the enrichment process. Some of the core technology was originally thought up in US national labs. It was substantially advanced in Australia. As a result of a bilateral treaty signed between the United States and Australia, it got brought back to the United States for further development. We've just achieved TRL 6, which means that we've had sort of a prototype working in realistic conditions. And what we've done in bringing it back to the United States has been to figure out a way to fully indigenize the core supply chain. So for example, the lasers that we would need to use in order to deploy this thing. All of that sort of works in the way that I've just talked about. You've got the foreign direct investment component. You've got the technology control component from a non-proliferation perspective. And again, I wanted to say, I promised that this was going to be a cool technology. I mean, first of all, it's lasers, so it's cool. But also, it potentially meets some really interesting demands in the market. So for example, it is really, really good for the re-enrichment of tails, something that we have a line on as a result of an agreement that we've had with the DOE for about a decade now. It is potentially really, really good for the use of recycled fuel. It is potentially really, really good for some of the really finely tuned enrichment levels that you need, both as new LNPP comes online and you've got the first couple of core loads, but then also some of the really sort of exotic enrichment levels that some of our friends in the SMR community are thinking about. So this is, again, not to be too focused on the single case, just it's the one that I happen to know. It's an example of the way that this web of partnerships and alliances has allowed technology to come back and forth, has allowed capital to come into the United States, and has put the United States in a position where, along with our allies and partners, we are really, really well positioned to meet sort of the evolving demands of the market. So again, thank you all very much.
Great, thank you very much. And I think you very nicely queued up my first question that I was going to ask the panel before turning it over to the audience. You mentioned depth, and I think that's really important in the context of all of the parallel investments that we're seeing from different governments through initiatives like the Sapporo 5 initiative, where there was a massive commitment made, particularly on the enrichment side, to really invest in the partner countries' capacities. And so I guess my question to this group is, how do you balance the need for depth in a nuclear fuel supply chain without creating redundancies where you trade one bottleneck for another? And also, what should governments do about that?
Yeah, I can try and go first on this question. I spoke a lot in my remarks about Urenco is a commercial company, and we have based our sort of building and investment on commercial contracts. I think we have been fairly vocal in that we feel that the political commitments by government to move away from Russian fuel, and the US really took, I think, the most leadership in legislating for that last year, provides a lot of that market certainty, the best type of market certainty to market players, because you have a clear cutoff date, you have waivers that dictate how much of that Russian material can come in the interim, so sort of supply in the market. I think there was obviously the other political decision, which was to invest in growing enrichment capacity in the United States and perhaps diversifying that as well. As a company, we are participating in that process with the DOE, and I think, as the only commercial scale enrichment supplier in the United States, we think we would be a very good partner for them in that endeavor. But it's certainly something that you need to keep in mind, because these are significant investments that will produce, hopefully, material, and you don't want a situation in which you are oversupplying the market. You are not seeing return on that investment, and that you are distorting a functioning market, particularly on the low enriched uranium side. As I said in my remarks, I think the advanced fuel market is different. The advanced reactor companies are developing and deploying in a different way than perhaps traditional nuclear. So yeah, I think it is a balance, but I mean, ultimately, I think the political decision was to invest to expand capacity, and Urenco supports that decision, and that's why we're working and participating in the DOE process.
And I think shortly, the mention of consortium, I think is in that regard very important. You want to have an agreement in terms of how you behave. You want to have a stockpile. You want to have capability to do a swap. You want to have capability to guarantee maybe the forgot the word, but then you want to have enough predictability built into the system. So the market fluctuation, changes, unpredictable situation, real time, real world happens, but then this consortium and then the reserve or capacity of what they have under the standard agreement should be arranged to deal with this issue. Yeah.
I'll just very quickly add that I think that all of these sort of government intervention policies that have been described here are good policies. So priming the pump with some investment in parts of the fuel cycle is a good policy. I think there's some really interesting stuff going on with the potential for a Defense Production Act consortium that allows a conversation about some of those potential bottlenecks that you've described. But I also want to really wholeheartedly agree with my friend from Urenco that the core to all of this is market certainty. Make sure that the actors understand the rules under which they're going to be operating, so that the orders get placed. If the orders get placed, the capacity is going to follow. And so, that includes, being very, very clear about the implementation of the Russia ban. I think it also includes clarity and consistency on trade relationships, because all of those things, in some way, clarity, certainty, those are what drive investment decisions. And to the extent that there is uncertainty, it just becomes much more difficult to make sure that we are far enough ahead of the curve to be filling demand as we meet it.
I think in that regard also, I think some of the current initial project, their success is critical. I think we've been waiting, especially in this country, waiting for the new development, SMRs. Question is, can we deliver? People are saying, we'll give you money. This is seed money, but deliver. So, I think, for example, Texas A&M University has a campus called Wellness Campus. It's becoming an energy proving ground, natural resources, ALO, Kairos Power, X Energy, and Lost Energy. They're all trying to build their reactor there. Question is, can you build on time, on budget? Will this really meet the milestone? I think the success of those projects will send the global signal that, hey, this industry is waking up, they can deliver, now let's move. I think the newcomer countries and all the interest in the global community will follow, which is, I think, the next stage signal. Thank you.
So I think one of the through lines that I'm hearing here is that the secondary theme of our discussion today is that certainty and creating certainty has very, very wide-ranging effects and is incredibly important for everything from fuel supply to, deploying nth-of-a-kind reactors. I do want to give time for audience Q&A, although I do certainly have other questions of my own. But we would now welcome questions from the audience. I have 3 requests for you. first, please introduce yourself when you are asking your question. I ask that you please keep your questions brief, and please keep your questions questions. Thank you very much. Yeah, Bill, go ahead.
Yeah, Bill Freeburn with S&P Global. Thank you. I want, at the risk of raising a question that is more divisive, I would wonder whether there isn't a little bit of tension in the idea of using the allies in the nuclear fuel supply chain versus the current administration's heavy focus on sort of an America first muscular trade policy, and the interest in having U.S. origin technology perhaps to underpin some form of enrichment, which we currently don't have, and the desire to have U.S. origin uranium and conversion services as well whenever possible. Obviously, it's limited in the near term, but in the midterm, and with the large amount of money being made available for the government to choose technologies for enrichment and conversion especially, isn't there some tension, and isn't there a desire to use a U.S. origin, favor U.S. origin technology?
Maybe I'll just start and say that I actually think tension is the wrong word. What I think there is are multiple demands that have to be met in different ways. And so again, we are, our largest mine is in Canada, but we are also the United States' largest historical miner and have the largest resources available in the United States. We're looking very hard at restarting those properties, partially because we think there are some very specific market demands that those mines are uniquely well suited to meet. There simply isn't a chain right now for the United States to meet all of its requirements, both civilian and national security. So it's a question of kind of fitting this all together across the fuel supply, so including conversion, including enrichment. And I think that there's actually a pretty straightforward way to do that. I would say that in my observation is that there's been a lot of realism in the way that the government has started to approach these questions to meet those divergent or distinct sort of pots of demand.
And I think that conflict or potential competition is inevitable. I think we're not talking about government policy, we're talking about commercial entities working together for profit. So, but then the recent incident, what happened between Westinghouse and KHNP is an example. They were working on the same, they were competing against the same project, and winners and losers. And I think that become very clear that both countries, not only the company, has to come to an agreement in terms and so on. Eventually they came to an agreement. I think that's an example. Why did they agree? Eventually they realized if we fight, we're gonna lose together. So the global market, the nuclear power development is currently, as many of us agree, dominated by Russia and China. If we don't do anything as allies, as partners, market is going to shift. That means United States will lose all of our leadership. That means we will also lose our industrial leadership. There is no market, there is no customers. So you have to first develop customers and make sure that you have the customers so that we can really talk about fuel supply and make sure that the supply can be sustained. So I think with that realization, there should be really a sort of a standard agreement how we should behave as part of the partners. But then also Sapporo 5 should be in that regard expanded to have diversity and then the sort of a win-win combination of the interest in the supply and demand. For example, Australia was not included there. Australia has world's third largest, they have the largest uranium deposit identified, that they're not using it at this point. So definitely the uranium resource issue can be hopefully taken care of by having Australia as part of it. South Korea is not included in there, but then of course, South Korea has a lot of soft power and credibility from the newcomer countries' import point of view, and they can really work hard to develop customers. And I think UAE and South Korea are working together these days on fuel fabrication facility, and that also UAE has also their own leverage in Middle East and Africa, and that really opens up lots of opportunities to diversifying the market, diversifying the customers. So the utilization of this, basically we need to increase the size of the pie by having these partners working together so that there is less conflict, less maybe competition in this, so that everybody can win.
I think there's just also a basic maybe communication point in the current environment. I think, I hope I don't get in trouble for saying this, but I think Urenco has maybe traditionally just operated a bit more under the radar. We have a big, beautiful enrichment plant in New Mexico, which meets, approximately 1/3 of U.S. Utilities and enrichment demands. But we haven't necessarily been that loud about it. And I think, to your point on meeting different interests, I think we do have to be more vocal about our history as a company and our investment into the United States. Urenco came to the United States because US utility customers asked us to. They said, hey, we want US domestic enrichment supply. Will you come and build in the United States? And we signed contracts enough to underpin that investment, and that's why we built. That is actually that's very welcome by this administration. I don't think they want to say no to, foreign investment into the United States. I mean, the recent deals with Japan and Korea demonstrate that. There are questions around diversity of supply and diversity of technology as well. I think that is another interest as well. But I think hopefully, when the nuclear industry is successful in sort of driving more deployment, there should be space for, a lot of different players to build and invest, because we're going to need a lot of investment and a lot of fuel to power increased deployment.
I think we have time for one or two more questions, so I'll ask that we take maybe two more together, and then we will let the panelists choose which one they want to answer. It'll be a little grab bag. Yes, please.
Thank you. Earlier this year, President Trump has announced a bunch of orders, and one of them was, as I remember, to renegotiate or establish 1-2-3 agreement with allies or other countries, possibly including Saudi Arabia or other countries. And 1-2-3 agreement obviously includes enriching and reprocessing, which is closely related to fuel industry. So how do you envision it could be related, or it will help unleashing American nuclear energy?
Okay, we'll take one more question quickly before. Maddie.
Hi, Maddie Cohen with EFI Foundation. Thank you so much for this great panel. I guess I was wondering what remains uncertain when it comes to the implementation of the Russian ban, and given that there has been a bit of a delay in the U.S. appropriations, are there any concerns about fuel demands not being met? Thank you.
Go ahead, take your pick, answer both, whatever you'd like.
Well, on the Russian uranium ban first, I think probably everyone in the room knows how it works. It comes into full effect on January 1st, 2028. In the interim period, certain amount of Russian supply is allowed under a waiver program administered by the DOE. I can just speak for Urenco. I mean, since the Russian ban was passed, we have been working and in close conversations with our customers on their needs, and looking closely at the market projections and demands. Not me personally, very smart people in the company look at market projections, and we have no concerns that once the ban comes into full effect in 2028, there will be a shortage of supply. That is because of the careful planning and our own sort of projections, and we're fairly confident that, or very confident that is the case. And I think the biggest telltale sign is we're not hearing from our customers like we have a problem. I think the legislation was designed in such a way that it gave a very clear cutoff date, and it allowed people that time to plan. I think in terms of sort of any concerns about implementation, as a company, Urenco advocates that the ban is fully implemented. There are provisions within the legislation for anti-circumvention. We are seeing a phenomena where there are increased deliveries of Russian SWU to China. And for the first time, we're seeing deliveries of Chinese material into the US market and into the European market. The legislation is designed in such a way that there shouldn't be that circumvention going on. So we are keeping a close eye on that, and I know that people on the Hill are keeping a close eye on that, because the legislation wasn't designed to be circumvented in that way.
On the issue of 1-3 agreement, as we know, 1-3 agreement could become a problem. As we saw in the past, United States tried to negotiate this 1-3 agreement with Egypt, and Egypt wasn't ready to accept. So they went to Russia. I think same thing may be happening with other countries, including Vietnam and so on. So again, I think the goal of 1-3 agreement set up in 1954 as part of the revision amendment of Atomic Energy Act. At that time, we had this global concern of nuclear material spread. So we have to make sure that as a government, we have to have this bilateral agreement that whoever accept our technology or material should behave. But then the world has changed. So in that regard, I think non-proliferation regime and 1-3 agreement is a legacy of Cold War. Now the world has changed. We have different world. We have different players, especially now a surge of different players makes it very, very important problem to re-examine. So I think modernization of 1-3 agreement or the related export control licensing should be, I think, a part of the discussion or examination for this development, to support this development. But at the same time, I think U.S. government has been really trying hard to look at that issue. For example, the 1-2 agreement with South Korea and United States, the 2014 amendment, allows South Korea to have some consideration on reprocessing and enrichment. But then that is under high-level bilateral committee. So, I mean, at least in the case of South Korea's 1-3 agreement, there is a clause that allows South Korea and USA to consider enrichment and reprocessing. I think right now in South Korea, people are talking about amendment of 1-3 agreement. We have to ask United States to allow South Korea to have all these capabilities. But it's not an issue of amendment. It's an issue of how the bilateral, I think, high-level commission works or committee works. So I think some of the details can be part of the 1-3 agreement. So it's a matter of how to execute. So I do see a need for modernization of 1-3 agreement. At the same time, executing the 1-3 agreement under the way it is. But then I think there is a need for intensive effort from both sides.
I would just very quickly conclude and say that I actually have a very high degree of confidence that our friends in the U.S. government, who, many of whom unfortunately can't be here today because they're not working, have the tools they need to do both of the things that we're talking about in this round of questions. They've got the tools they need in order to make sure that the Russia ban is fully implemented and the pump is fully primed. And they've got the tools necessary in order to build the web of bilateral and multilateral relationships to both encourage new nuclear and also control for the potential safety and security problems that creates. That's the 1-2-3 agreement, the negotiation process. It's also, as we've seen in recent weeks, trade agreements such as the new bilateral trade agreement with Malaysia, the investment and trade agreements that have been signed with Japan and South Korea. I think all of those tools exist, and a government that is mobilized to use them in the interest of an objective like tripling new nuclear by 2050 has what it needs to do that.
Very good. Well, we'll let that be the last word for this panel. So thank you all very, very much to my panelists here. Please join me in giving them a big round of applause.